It's Overland story time, and in the next 3 episodes we're going to be discussing James and Mira's trip through Africa, 14 countries in the Honey Badger. In episode 1 we're discussing the prep, the do's, the don'ts, the lessons learned on James and Mira's first ever proper overland trip. So sit back, grab a cold one and enjoy this epic tale. This is their story.
James, Mira, thank you for joining us on this. I think everybody's sitting at home, climbing the walls like I am at the moment, and stories like what you guys have to tell, I think should be able to entertain the people that view the channel, and it gives you time to share your story, because I think your story is pretty unique. But I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to give it to you guys. I'm going to say, right, why Africa? So set the scene for us there.
Okay. Right. Okay, so I guess it all started when we were basically dating. It was still very early on in our relationship, and I think I recall very clearly one date that James and I had. We were in Al Ain at the time in the UAE, and both of us had been talking about what of our dreams are. For me, it was more about having these long-term trips and finding a way to create adventure, later on in life, and Africa being kind of the one continent I still hadn't really explored. And for James, it was that plus doing it in a car and overlanding. And that was kind of the beginning of the conversations before anything kind of really came into place. And it was literally just a conversation and a dream that we had, which kind of led to becoming a lot more of a reality for when we got married. So,
I guess we both love traveling.
Yes.
And we'd been on a few trips together. And we were just kind of talking, I remember this night, about where we hadn't been, what would be a proper adventure that we could do. 'Cause, when you're working, you can go on a 2-week trip, 3-week if you're pushing your luck.
Yeah.
But the limit, you're not really living it. It's just an excursion. And we just kind of landed on Africa, and it just fitted perfectly because neither of us had seen much of it. We've both been to Egypt and South Africa, but nothing else. And it's a proper adventure. It's quite unexplored. Yeah. Sure, you can get to any country in Africa, but actually to get under the skin and really look around, you need a car and have absolute freedom. You can get right off the beaten track. And it's big, so you can, we were there for.
And you're newlyweds. You don't want to go and sit in an overland truck with 50 other people in it, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. No.
I mean, to be fair, those overland trips are fun.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of having the freedom.
Yeah.
Like we can do what we want, when we want, how we want.
And that was very much how we felt.
Yeah, we arrived in a place, go, well, yeah, we like this place, let's just stay for a month.
Yeah.
And we would. So that was kind of what made it.
Well, that's kind of the discussion. But what made it was literally what we decided when we were planning for our wedding.
Yeah.
Was why don't we get people to help support our this idea of us going on a trip? So let's ask for it as honeymoon gifts. So we started literally a honeymoon. What do you call a wedding register of all the fun activities and things we want to do whilst we're in Africa. So then that made it basically, a solid. We have to go now because people have presented all these fun things for us to do. And so now we've got to plan and go out and do it.
Yeah, I have to admit that was a sly trick of Mira's, because it was, I was doing all right in my career, and in many ways going away for a year wasn't going to do any good.
Yeah.
And so it was nice to dream and talk about it, but once people had actually paid for us to work for a number of different charities or go hot air ballooning over the Masai Mara, we couldn't just not do it.
Yeah.
So that was like the contract signed, if you like, and we had to go after that.
So tell me more about this, right? So obviously your list is not bread makers and microwave ovens and all kinds of things like that normally on a wedding list, right? So what were the kind of gifts that the people gave you?
So we put up a list of probably 15 or 17 different activities we had in mind that we'd love to do if we were to do this trip. So things like hot air ballooning over the Masai Mara,
climbing
Kilimanjaro, whale shark diving in Mozambique, safaris in Botswana, Ngorongoro crater. I mean, literally, the list I think was about 17 different things. Plus, we had one or two more mechanical things where help us buy our roof tent, because that was also quite. So it wasn't the case of you bought the entire event. All they did was basically give us a bit of cash, but it was towards those specific things. Gorilla trekking in Uganda.
Oh, beautiful.
All of them, to be honest. There was,
we managed to do every single one. I think there was one that we didn't do, which was the baobab trees in Madagascar.
Yes.
And that's still on the list. To be fair, we still need to do it. But it was just logistically and from a cost perspective, that's a whole trip on its own. Madagascar.
Yeah, Madagascar is you can't really add that into the Africa. Just trying to get across from Mombasa or probably from Mozambique now. I heard that they have opened up the channels over there, but the cost over there is pretty much the same cost of getting your vehicle from here to Mombasa.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's why we chose not to go. We didn't realize that at the time.
And also the time involved when you're shipping cars. I mean, we were eventually on the road for, I think it was 15 months.
Yeah.
And the whole time we were hurrying. People talk about Africa like it's a country, but that's a big continent. And we did, I guess, 14 countries in Africa, which was less than, I'd say it's a third of the continent that we actually saw.
The 57 countries, including all the islands. So yeah.
So it's like a chip off the block.
Yeah.
And even then, like I say, we were permanently hurrying and trying to get every activity and every site in, and we could have spent 3 times the amount of time and still not seen everything we wanted to see.
Right. So you're now getting married, and you get all these gifts from, and a birdie told me there's some gifts that you actually had to do some hard labor, but I'm sure we'll get into that as it go along. But now you had a vehicle, right, James? Or at this point in time, no vehicle yet?
Yeah, when we got married, I think I just bought it.
It was literally like a month before we got married, or just after. So it was when we started with the wedding registers, when we decided, okay, we can now go ahead and look at buying the car.
So we were living and working in Dubai at the time.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of research. Andrew St. Pierre White was awesome, really useful.
Yeah.
Would have been if you'd started a bit earlier, because we'd have watched all of those videos. And ultimately, it was a toss-up, the obvious toss-up between a Land Rover and a 70 Series Land Cruiser. And there was part of me, being British, thinking I'm duty-bound to buy a Land Rover.
Yes.
But it just isn't as good for that kind of trip, the Land Cruiser is a better choice.
Yeah.
We had plenty of problems with the Land Cruiser. Don't get me wrong; it was far from perfect.
Yeah.
But all of the reviews, all of the research said Land Rovers are beautiful, but Land Cruisers are just better. They're more reliable.
Yeah.
They're easier to access. They're easier to repair.
Yeah. And the parts are available through Africa because every single safari company is using the 70 series platform. So if anything goes wrong with gearbox, diff, any of those parts, it's like going into a supermarket basically, and you can just pick and choose.
Yeah.
And we absolutely experienced it. I mean, we had friends who we met on the road who were there who had Land Rovers, and they really did struggle to get parts if they were, in the middle of Ethiopia, for example, where for us it was just literally even, the little garage around the corner in a village you've never even heard about would still have the parts for a Land Cruiser.
Yeah. Right, so you purchased the 76 series as your base, right? And at this point in time, it hasn't got a name yet. It's still a white one. And you basically cut your teeth four-wheel driving, right? If I'm not mistaken. I mean, your experience in off-roading between the two of you really wasn't much at that point in time. You've been touring, but yet you hadn't been doing an overland intense four-wheel driving, right?
Yeah, so we'd done a lot of driving in the desert. Like when I first moved over here, we lived in Alain. We worked in a camp literally in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I'd drive the desert every day. The desert was fine.
Yeah.
But dune bashing and overlanding are not quite the same.
Totally different, yes.
You break your car dune bashing, you tow it to a garage, you're good to go. You break your car open, you need to fix it.
Yeah.
So it's quite a different style of driving. So Mira did most of the research in terms of how we can prepare this this white thing into an overlanding beast. And that was fun.
That was probably my favorite part of preparation, was getting the car ready.
Yeah. It was really fun. There are so many options out there, and approaching it with no experience meant that there were quite a few roadblocks. There were lots of things that we realized would be useful or might be nice, and then trying to prioritize those, fit them into the right budget, and actually get them built reliably in this country. That's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, in hindsight, and at the time, I guess we knew if we'd shipped the car to South Africa, got it done there, and shipped it back again, that would have been a better option. We decided not to, really, because we wanted to watch everything being built in so we can understand really how it worked.
And we didn't know any
trial
better.
it.
We had been in South Africa and seen everything that they had, for example, there.
Yeah.
And, that was the last part of our trip. So by the time we got to see all of that, we were just like, oh, wow. Yeah. We could have done this for a lot cheaper and a lot better.
Yeah. But I think you make a good point there, where having actually being part of the build, because invariably something is going to go wrong. Overlanders aren't putting their vehicles through extreme off-roading, but Africa can throw anything at you at any given time, right? And vehicles do break, and if you don't know how to fix it or how that was put together, let's take electronics, for example, how a battery management system is working, your fridge stops working, and you weren't there seeing where those cables are going, you're buggered. Something as simple as a wire. Yeah. So, okay, so you built the truck here, and now how did you get it? Where did you go from here? How did you get it to Africa?
There's one important part that came just before the build. And we were on an awesome trip actually in Liwa.
Yeah.
We went to the Liwa Crescent and just took a bearing to the Qasr Al Sarab. And we were driving over the dunes, and we rolled it.
No. You're joking.
So at this point
How long is this before your trip?
Oh, a while.
This is early days. This is probably just 2 or 3 months after we bought it, so it must have been
It was probably about 6 to 9 months, I guess.
Oh, okay. So it's not. Okay.
And what we'd done, I think I perhaps raised a suspension or something. We'd done some things, but I hadn't changed it. Those ancient wheels you get on a 70C, or you used to.
Yeah.
Where you can just like get the tires. Yeah. And I love the idea of those because they were steel and because you can change the tires yourself. So I thought they're really narrow.
Yeah.
And I had these massive tires on them, and we were still learning. I mean, I didn't really know what I was doing. And we rolled it. We were quite lucky because we rolled it on the top of an enormous dune, and it just went onto its roof on the top. Had we gone down, that would have been another.
That car would have been totaled.
So, and these things, they're like Coke cans.
Oh yeah.
I had to get the high lift out to take the roof off the dashboard. Yeah. Luckily, no one was hurt. I think Mira cut herself climbing out of a broken window slightly, but nothing serious. So we now have a roll cage because we didn't want that to happen again, and that's why the honey badger, as she's now called, is black. Yeah. Because we thought if we're getting a whole new shell put on, we might as well paint it another color.
A badass color.
There we go.
And they're largely black, so we went with that.
And honey badger, how did that come to? I mean, obviously, besides being black, but I mean, you guys haven't been to Africa yet. How do you know about honey badgers, man?
There was a stupid. We were thinking of all sorts of names. We realised that this car needed a cool name. And the main themes were it needed to be kind of tough, something to do with Africa.
Yeah.
And I remember one night we'd had a few drinks and we were watching this stupid YouTube video about honey badgers.
Okay.
You might know the one I mean. It was there was a National Geographic documentary. This guy
where he gets taken out by the cobra and goes for a sleep and wakes up, takes it off, and off he goes. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Strongest animal in Africa, mate.
Yeah, it really is. Right. I mean, holy cow.
Toughest animal in Africa.
And it just fits. I mean, it is so tough. We met one eventually in Botswana, wasn't it, in Tosha? And they they don't give a damn.
Yeah. Well, our military vehicles in South Africa, there's one big bad military vehicle, and it's called the Rattle, which is the Afrikaans of honey badger. And it's also an indestructible military vehicle, and they called it that purely for that.
But yeah, it's lived up to its name. I will say that.
Yeah,
the honey badger definitely has.
So now, so we've got the vehicle built. Well, you fixed the vehicle and you built the vehicle, and then how did you get it from here to Africa then?
We shipped. The original plan was to drive from here through Saudi, through Sinai, and then basically circumnavigate the whole of Africa.
Okay.
Drive back, which would have been cool. I'd still love to do that. But there were, I guess, three main issues. There was getting through Saudi first. That wasn't unsurmountable. Like now, sure, with the back then we could have got a 3-day transit visa.
Yeah.
But by the time we'd got to Sinai, they wouldn't allow 4x4 vehicles. This is
when there was the Arab revolution going on.
Yeah,
and the Arab
so Yemen pretty much shut down at that point in time. Yeah.
So that was one issue, and we thought, well, fine, we can ship it and then still drive around. But then Ebola arrived.
Yes.
We met some poor overlanders that were stuck in countries, not allowed out for like 3 months.
Yeah, this is their blog.
And we thought, well, what we ultimately want to do in Africa was that kind of romantic idea of national parks and much of that is Eastern Southern Africa. So well, fine, So we shipped from Dubai, I think it was in April 2014.
Yeah.
Stuck the car in a container and shipped it over to Mombasa. Okay. That came with its own issues. We locked it all up. We were very security conscious. Everything on the car had padlocks.
Yeah.
We stuck the container, jumped on a flight, and then got a call from Mombasa where we were waiting for it, saying, "Oh, you need to come to the port in Jebel Ali and unlock your padlocks."
So you're already in Kenya.
Yeah.
So this was another kind of rookie mistake, because we left before the car did, and so by the time we left, we'd assumed, because of the discussions that we'd had, that customs wouldn't be an issue, and of course it ended up being an issue. So we had to. So this is, again, if I can give any advice to anybody doing it from whatever country, make sure you wait until that car is actually on the ship, then you leave.
Yeah, because you're always going to get there first.
Yeah.
But luckily, we managed to have a reasonable conversation with the customs guys, and they let it go. So that was a bonus. We didn't have to fly back.
Okay.
And then we got stuck in Mombasa for a month.
Yeah, because the ship it hadn't left yet, right?
Well, it's not so much that. The ship did leave quite soon after. Okay. But the whole port went on strike.
Yeah. It was,
so the car arrived in Mombasa, but we couldn't get it. And then, of course, you've got all of the
Al-Shabaab, and there were bombings happening as we were in Mombasa as well, and just
forgotten about that. Yeah, we had people throwing grenades. We could hear it from our hotel, actually, a hotel about a 5-minute walk away. Had a bomb thrown over the wall, and then there were grenades in bus stops. So we got out of Mombasa, hired a moped, which was fun, or like a motorbike, and drove down to Diani.
Okay.
Stayed in a hostel down there, which was our first experience of bed bugs.
Welcome to Africa.
Yep.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, in fact, we never wanted to stay in any hostels or hotels because on our budget, we couldn't afford nice place. Yeah. So actually, the best bed available to us in Africa was on the roof of our car all the time.
Absolutely.
We were desperate to get back in there every time we had to sleep anywhere else.
Yeah.
So we went down to Diani for a bit. And then, of course,
the bed bugs can't be from Graham, because we just did Graham's episode, and that was in 1999. So you were in 2014. So you're safe. It wasn't Graham's big bed bugs, right? Because that's pretty much where he started his trip as well.
God, yeah.
It's a good introduction. I mean, that's the kind of thing that's absolutely the norm in Africa.
Yes.
You have to it's better for you to come to terms with it very early on.
Yes.
And I think that's actually quite useful for us to have that month, because other than just kind of culturally getting ourselves a bit more accustomed to the fact that we're in this continent, but country, specifically Kenya at that time, that is very different to Dubai.
Yeah.
And I've been living in Dubai for 16 years. That's been my reality for a very long time.
Yeah.
And Africa's a completely different story. And then, although we're big travelers, again, nothing is like that. And so, bed bugs, like we said, terrorist attacks and grenades and robbery and just
mosquitoes that kill you.
Mosquitoes, malaria. It's just never ending. Everything wants to kill you in Africa. And so it was like, okay, this is good for us to have like a little bit of a custom.
Yeah, it was a steep learning.
Yeah, it was.
That and also, I'd been working right up until the moment we left.
Yeah.
So I'd never really had the time to get my head around the trip. So when we were there, we set up the blog properly. We were writing magazine articles. We came up with a logo and all of these kind of things that take a bit of time. You wouldn't really want to do on the road. So it wasn't, in hindsight, a bad thing.
But it just delayed the whole process a bit longer.
Yeah.
But we made it in the end. It got the car eventually arrived. We had to bribe a few people to finally get it out of the container, but it worked.
But everything was fine, right? So everything was still secure, no issues. You eventually get the vehicle, right? Because that's your biggest concern. It's now been sitting at port. They're striking. They're unhappy for a reason, and that's where things go wrong normally.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it was locked up properly. Like every single access point, everything shiny on the outside, had a tough padlock on it. So even if they'd wanted to, it would have been a struggle. So negotiated the bribes. I didn't want to pay anything, and that probably delayed us another week.
Yeah.
Like to the point where James was so scared that he eventually, I think at one point you were going to sleep with the container.
Yeah.
Because you were so scared they were going to unlock it overnight or something. That was just the day before we received this. So he had to hang out.
So you get your vehicle out, and now you want to start your trip, right? And you guys have built this vehicle, shipped everything into this vehicle, and you've been living in Africa for better part of 3 weeks, 4 weeks now?
Yeah.
And you obviously packed in there what your thoughts of Africa was, but the reality is obviously a lot different. Now you're there and you're thinking, okay, So tell me about your packing regime and how you packed for this.
Packing was a disaster. We just had in mind that we'd need a lot more than we really actually did need. I mean, just even simple things like clothes. I think we packed a massive duffel bag of clothes and just bits of equipment and things that we thought we'd need for personal hygiene and care, and books and all these other additional, quite clunky things that were sitting in the car. And literally, like you said, within 4 weeks of arriving there, we realized, forget it. I mean, first of all, we're doing all our own washing, and it's all, within a couple of days, you just have to sit there, scrub it all out, dry it, and so on.
Yeah.
So I remember very clearly, because we got there and we tried to repack the first couple of days whilst we were in Mombasa before we headed on the road. And it was just a disaster. It was so full. The car was like 3.5 tons, I think, of just crap. And so we were very lucky in the sense that we had our first trip through Savo, which was amazing, and got to Nairobi. And when we were in Nairobi, we actually ended up bumping into a colleague of James's who was coming out for work. Well, not bumping in, but called us and let us know that he was there. So we literally packed an entire massive duffel bag and a suitcase full of stuff and sent it back with him, which was
everyone who visited us left with a
massive suitcase of stuff. Yeah, so further along the trip, and we got rid of a lot of stuff as well.
Yeah, so generally, I mean, I would prefer, and in hindsight, I don't regret it, because I think it's much worse when you realise that you urgently need something than you don't have it.
Yeah.
So the fact that we could ditch things as we went was fine. Because we knew it fits in the car. I clung on to my linen suit, which of course in Africa is essential, as possible. But yeah, Mira's having none of it, so that went too in the end.
And James is kind of one of these guys who overpacks. Even when we're going for a 2-day weekend trip now, he'll pack as if he's going for a whole week or 10 days. With every emergency possible requirement as well in the process. So we did have a lot.
I understand what you're saying. Overpacking it and then sending back, and having the ability to send back does make a lot of sense. But traveling through Africa, and especially Africa, that everything that you need to survive in Africa is readily available in Africa. Now, obviously, if you'd forgotten your fridge, I don't think you would have been able to find an ARB fridge at a good price in Kenya. You would probably have to ship one in, but everything else, pots, pans, anything you need to survive is readily available at all the shops. So you don't really need to. It's just those nice to haves that you need to have with you, like your linen suit, obviously. And nice to have.
I'm glad he's the one who mentioned it and not me, because there are a lot of things like that were just like, "Why are you?"
I mean, I'd say the two biggest things that we did end up hanging on to for much of it, in terms of potential surplus, was a suitcase full of diving stuff.
Yeah.
Because a part of the trip was working with the Marine Megafauna Foundation, and it's just safer, it's better, it's cheaper if you've got your own stuff. So we did hang on to that. And the other one was the drone. Okay. Because back then we didn't have these neat little fold-up-y things. It was a beast. And then that was in a kind of big waterproof, bash-proof box. So that was...
that took so much space.
That was huge, actually. How that wasn't confiscated by customs, I do not understand. But
I think at the time nobody really knew about them, and I think that was your saving grace, right? I think nowadays it's easy for any customs traveling into any country, anywhere. The first thing they're looking for is drones, right? 2014 in Africa, I don't think anybody's ever seen a drone, right?
No, and that was the reality. In most places we went, if they saw it, they're like, "What is that?" And it was like one of the first very clunky drones that existed.
Well, I mean, most places you travel to in Africa, you take a photo and you turn the SLR camera around, the guy sees his face immediately, he's blown away, right? They're used to cameras where they've got to go and develop the film, and then weeks later, the guy sees himself printed on a piece of paper. The fact that immediately his image comes up on screen blows their mind, right? So,
for that reason, we bought this little printer. So we could take pictures of people and immediately print a little picture of them, and they loved that.
Yeah,
oh wow, nice, what a great idea!
Yeah, that
really,
worked really well.
Really nice way, because then you take like a group photo and you give it to them, and they'd love that.
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah, yo. Oh, yeah, yo.